Okay. Well, good morning, you guys. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you for letting me be able to present on this. Um, Today, I am presenting on Walter Rauschenbusch. He was a German pastor in New York during the end of the 18th century, 19th century, going into the 20th century. And he, with his views of the way society was going, found a very unique way to have social critique of the times that he lived in. And honestly, I think that we can take a lot that we can learn from his example, maybe more or less, not necessarily from his views, but from the way that he communicated his views and challenged the day and age of his time. So, what to expect? Well, I'm going to tell you guys who is Walter Rauschenbusch, what made him important to the faith, what are his writings about, and then what can we in 2025 take away? But first things first, who is Walter Rauschenbusch? Well, he lived 1861 to 1918. So he lived in a post-Civil War America, right, with rising industrialism and the progressive expansion of countries and capitalism. He served as a pastor and a social justice warrior around the turn of the century. Now, I use the term social justice warrior not in the modern day sense that we think of it. I use that in the term, I say that is because he saw the terrible errors of rising capitalism and industrialism and how it was negatively affecting people, their way of life, their sanitation, their health, and how it encouraged sin in society. He saw that and said, this is not okay. We need to reform society to fit more like the kingdom of God. To do this, he wrote a theology for the social gospel in 1917. This was right at the turn of World War I, right when it started. And his goal was to inspire American Christians with a prophetic vision of the kingdom of God. He wanted to encourage Americans to work and change their society to fit more in alignment with how Jesus described the kingdom of God. Now, people should treat one another. So, Rauschenbusch's time, I have a picture of 1910s New York. I felt like it would be fitting because that's where he lived. He lived in Hell's Kitchen in New York City. He was the pastor of a church with a bunch of working immigrants, like lower class German working immigrants. And so his perspective was heavily fueled by the people around him. He himself, I think, was an immigrant. And so him being around that, being around the people who were in the factories, who were in the slime of industrialism, really, really rang with his heart. It quoted with him that what wrung him the most was the funerals of children. Those were the things that jarred him the most. And that led him to led him to go to such an extreme to fight the kingdom of evil that he would later call. In 1910s New York, they fought rapid industrialism, urbanization, and immigration. You had the rise of big corporations. You had the rise of factories, mass production of like meat industry, cars, and other sort of things. And the working conditions for these were terrible. To quote the book, said it drawed millions of cities, leading to awful work conditions, overcrowded tenements as housing, disease, poor sanitation, unhealthy food, a lack of clean air and water, rising alcoholism, and looser morals. If you guys ever read the Jungle, get the yes, Sinclair Ferguson's The Jungle. That's very much a similar book aligned with this time. Whoops. So what I found most interesting is his day and age that he was in was not too different from our day and age. I say this to say there's not too much different from people having to be pushed to their limit, right, to work to barely make a life in today's economy and today's society, all the while we do not provide a good environment for people to succeed, people to thrive. We're becoming more and more isolated, more and more stuck with screens, which can negatively affect us. All the while, the society and the way that it is structurally run pushes us to be more inclined to sin against one another. That is what he noticed with increasing capitalism in America. So he wrote his book, Theology of a Social Gospel. This book, honestly, I'm considering buying it because it was very interesting. I want to go ahead and let you know that he always kept his political views private, but he himself inclined more towards socialism. He himself, Walter Rauschenbusch. But he did not let that fuel over into him trying to like advocate for socialism in America. Rather, it fueled the way that he wanted critiqued in society in America. His book, Theology of the Social Gospel, was written in 1917. And what makes the work unique is the systematic nature in which Rauschenbusch pours over Christian doctrines of sin and atonement, and how it doesn't just affect, like, I don't just sin against faith, Dr. Knight, but my sin against God also affects the way people interact with one another. And so if we build a system that fosters sin against one another, that is the kingdom of evil. That's not good. Because that was the whole theme of his book, was the contrast between the kingdom of God and of evil. It presents a social view of salvation as a remedy for a social view of sin. It emphasizes the importance of how sin affects one another and when a society is built on the foundations to let sin against one another be the norm. He saw large people, these millionaires, billionaires, create these huge organizations that allowed them to get all of these resources, all of this money, fueled by greed, selfish ambition, and they created work environments that like absolutely destroyed human life. He saw that as the intrinsic kingdom of evil, the sin, social sins. He said sin always undercuts human relations, and to put profit above and ambition above the welfare of fellow human beings is to sin against God and our brothers and sisters. What makes this super, super interesting is we are now almost 100 years out from this type of industrial, and we've had worker reforms. We've had laws put in place. However, it does not change the fact that people put profit and ambition for themselves, and it creates a detriment to other people. That is the primary critique of capitalism, and that was his critique of capitalism, not capitalism bad. He said, like, you intrinsically doing these things off of greed and ambition. He tackled the heart nature of sin on why people pursued these terrible environments that happened to other people. I thought that was very interesting because it put into my own perspective of like, okay, now when I see huge people in the news and they do all of these things and they create environments that on the micro level with us, it's like, oh, this is terrible. It's like, okay, let's get to the heart of the issue. They're probably just acting off of profit and ambition. Those are just sinful natures of the heart from lost people. Very, very educating. He identified 6 social sins that were related to the death of Jesus. Let's see if I can move it. The religious bigotry of religious leaders who used political powers for their own ends. Okay, that's one of the social sins. The corruption of justice, where innocent people are considered guilty. Mob spirit, or the social spirit gone mad. The militaristic mindset of an empire. And then class contempt, as crucifixion was only meant for lower classes. He saw these direct social sins that were directly related to the death of Jesus and saying, like, Jesus didn't just die for aiding and hating somebody else. Jesus died for the corruption of justice and the religious bigotry and the militaristic mindset. These social sins caused by the collective sin of the whole. And the coolest thing about it is that he encouraged us that the kingdom of God is humanity restored back to him, as also restoring with one another. To live in the, let me move this. To live in the kingdom of God brings us back into right relationship with him and thus others. And it calls us to fight the kingdom of evil. When we turn towards the kingdom of God, turn to how he wanted us to treat one another with kindness and compassion, and more importantly, to see every person as a divine creation of God. Every person was made in the image of him and is intrinsically special and has worth. When we see people like that, it changes how we pursue our own self. Like, oh, do I want to pursue my own self-sufficiency and then build a factory that demeans human life? No. When you value human life, you consider your own actions on how you can serve one another. That's what he described it meant to live in the kingdom of God, and how we as a society and as Christians should encourage others to pursue that life, because that is what Jesus has called us to. So I got a question. How does this affect today's world? Well, there are three ways Rauschenbusch critiqued the society of his day in a Christ-like manner that we can also take to heart. The biggest thing that he said was we needed to fight the indifference. So frequently could we as Christians and we as people simply look at the way the world is around us and become indifferent to it. We say, oh, there's nothing we can change. I guess that's just the way it is. I'll just continue to buy the same products from the same people who do the same terrible things because I just have to make ends meet. He says that is not okay. We do not need to be indifferent to the terrible things that are happening in this world. And we actually can make a difference. And when you realize we can make a difference to make this world better. The second thing was to educate others, to take what you learn and see, oh, hey, do not be indifferent to the problems of the world around you. Rather, seek to educate others. Seek to tell them, hey, there's this corporation is doing bad things to people. Let's not turn a blind eye towards that. Let's have compassion to the people and be aware of the sin in society, and let's educate others on that. Guess what? So that a real change can be made in the kingdom way. And that's the most important thing. To seek kingdom solutions. This isn't just let's all rally with signs in front of the Capitol building and just talk about how terrible the world is. No. One of the things, Rauschenbusch, fun fact, was best friends with Rockefeller. Yes, the same Rockefeller who was the oil industry. They were friends. Okay. That doesn't, I was like, oh, okay. So, guy who's saying like the system is bad, it's all blamed to the millionaires, is best friends with one of the main millionaires who was heralding this industrial revolution. Okay, one thing that I really respected about Rauschenbusch that I think we can take today was he never critiqued the person, rather he critiqued the sin and how it was affecting society. He didn't say, you millionaire, you are wrong and you're a bad person. Rather, he said, hey, money, you're buying it, like politicians are being bought out, and that undermines democracy. He would say these things in an effort to convict these millionaires. He would say what they're doing. He would say how it negatively affects society without ever actually pointing a finger at the direct person and saying, you terrible person. He did it in a very tasteful way where he respected the people around him because guess what? They were a millionaire. They were doing bad things. But they were also a person. They were also someone who is divinely made in the image of God. Now they were sinning and they were doing things based off of selfishness and ambition, but he called out that selfishness and ambition, and which is what he used to critique others. And that was something I really think we can all take away, was when we want to critique society, when we see the way things are going, I think it is better to not to be indifferent to the problems of society, that we can seek to educate others in the real problems, not just something that we think should be fixed. And when we let's seek a kingdom solution. Let's seek an actual way. Okay, what does the Bible say about this solution? Not just what do I think should be the solution. Oh, I think let's abolish all of the higher class and give all the resources to the working class. Okay, guess what? That's never been proved to work. That's socialism. Rather, I think we can seek kingdom solution by informing the people that, hey, guess what? I think your actions are selfish and ambitious, and it's causing problems for the rest of society. It was to show humility, to see every person have intrinsic worth, but also to be respectful, yet not to be afraid to call out the problems in society, the selfishness and the ambition, and to deal with the roots of our problems in society. So, any questions?
So I wonder if if Rauschenbusch friends of Satan Bush.
I don't know, but I would hope so. I bet you so, yeah.
Um,
Because like let's jump back to the example of Elon Musk. Or let's take get the guy who runs Apple. Okay. They have factories all in China, terrible work conditions, terrible pay to crank out the iPhone. Okay. We do and then we use the iPhone. To be honest with you, a Rauschenbusch approach would be to not turn a blind eye, to not turn a blind eye to the fact that there's terrible working conditions, to seek to educate others. Hey, how can we help that? Hey, there's tragedy going on overseas in these factories that like people are getting their lives are getting ruined. Their humanity is getting crushed down upon by what? By big corp. Okay. How do we seek a solution? Honestly, I think it's one solution would be to call out the selfishness of the industry. That helps to educate the people higher up to us to say it is selfish to do so. Also, second, go to those people and help them out. Find ways that we can create a way for them to have life, for a way for them to we send money to them. Or I don't know. I'm not an economist. I also don't have any connections in China. I'm just going off the dome here.
I mean, this is early, said kind of social justice. And notice that there is a difference. Say, like, for example, not affecting people. Because in some way, we all sadly contribute to equality and situation.
And that was and that was something that he said is like you first have to this first thing fight the indifference is you have to do a catalog of yourself. Where do I fuel the problem? And really it's like where do I fuel the problem? Because it didn't take into account it did take into account the fact that like you have to buy these products. Like you have to eat and function sometimes, and sometimes you have to like participate in the social sin. But that's what he was saying is we must fight the fact that we have to participate into the social sin. He's like, how can we fight that and said reform society to better reflect the kingdom of God? I will also say that his social gospel was like as it went later on, it got heavily skewed, and I would say it's not even true. But its original foundations by Rauschenbusch was heavily founded in the gospel and Jesus's redemptive work in human lives, and how it doesn't just affect I don't sin anymore, but rather it changes how people in society function. That was the core tenets that this was built on. Thank you so much. Yeah.